I'm Dean Newland, and welcome to Leadovation. Reimagine, facilitate, flourish. This podcast is dedicated to the art and science of innovative leadership. Through insightful interviews with industry experts, I bring you cutting-edge strategies and experiences of innovative leadership, helping you think differently, act strategically, and achieve remarkable results. Join me as I provide insights and tools that empower you to make smarter decisions, forge meaningful relationships. Welcome to Leadovation. In this episode of Leadovation, I sit down with leadership advisor and executive coach Kendra Dahlstrom to explore a question many leaders quietly wrestle with. Why do smart, accomplished executives sometimes react in ways that later they regret? Think about that email that they sent that they shouldn't have. Kendra works with high-achieving leaders and C-suite executives around the world, helping them improve executive presence, emotional intelligence, and decision-making under pressure. She's also the host of the High Achieving Leader podcast, where she explores the psychology and performance patterns of top leaders. In our conversation, we dig into how stress pushes leaders outside what psychologists call the window of tolerance, and why high performers often become workaholics, and how childhood experiences can, quite frankly, quietly shape how executives handle conflict, accountability, and pressure. We also talk about practical ways to build self-awareness, from recognizing psychological signals like heart rate to questioning the digital habits and coping patterns many leaders rely on. So if you've ever wondered why certain situations trigger you more than they should, or how the most effective leaders develop calm, presence, and clarity under pressure, this episode offers insights that could change the way you lead. Kendra, it's nice to have you on the show. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Let me start you off with, let's start off with a bigger question, kind of going outside in and then maybe inside out. If you take a look at the external world that's going on right now, the changes in AI, maybe you can get into even political changes. You make a very good point in your work that our reactions to situations that happen day to day with leaders and companies is often a trigger of something that takes place when you were a kid. So you're kind of reacting to the situation, but the situation might be inspired by something that was maybe years and years and years ago. What is the external world? How is it affecting our triggering? Are we becoming more trigger happy or less? And you think about the external world with AI, all that is here's my question. Is emotional intelligence in the leaders that you're seeing getting better or worse based on the outside world? And we'll talk about the inside world in a minute, but the external world.
That's a great question. So there's two answers. I think it's becoming better because leaders are becoming more aware of it, because self-regulation, which is the core of emotional intelligence, is becoming harder and harder. And why that's happening is because ever since, it's been going back for a ways, but let's start it at the pandemic, which we can all relate to in terms of a cortisol injection and huge stress in our lives. What that does is that activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which takes you out of what we call in therapy the window of tolerance. And so what it does is it either completely activates your parasympathetic nervous system and it's turned on all the time, which puts you into hypervigilance, anxiety, all of those things, potentially PTSD, all those things, or you completely shut it off, which puts you into apathy, depression, those types of things. And so the window of tolerance is in between the two. We want to live our life in between the two. And on occasion, we'll get bumped out, but be able to regulate and bring ourselves back in. Emotional intelligence is one's ability to self-regulate. So it's getting better because it's becoming more necessary for leaders to self-regulate. So they're needing to actually start getting curious about it, or if they're already well aware of it, practicing it, making sure they can get better at it and hone those skills. I think it's becoming worse because it is so needed and very few are practicing and know about it. So that's a convoluted answer to your question.
No, it's a good answer. I've just been noticing, like, if you think even like on the political aspect and you're looking at the outside world, it seems like we're a lot more reactive. We're trigger happy. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not so good. But I'm also sensing and wondering what your thought is that our sensitivity is higher. The
Mm-hmm.
veil is thinner. The ability to empathize with other situations and people or be affected by them seems to be much higher than it was before. And so therefore it seems like, at least in my opinion, that we are needing emotional intelligence more than ever because we're struggling with it more than ever.
Absolutely. And a big piece of the emotional intelligence is the self awareness. And then how that connects to being aware of actually how you're feeling in the moment, and then being able to take that courageous action to give yourself what you need in that moment. So sometimes it's, I need to go outside for 5 minutes, or I need to go to the gym, or I need to go for a walk, or I just need to go take a shower, whatever it is to remove yourself from that situation. What I find, especially in leadership situations, and even if you were to look at the, macroeconomic situation and global warfare, we have to be so reactive and we're so time bound that we don't give ourselves the compassion to be able to take those 5 minutes. And I know some of those situations we literally can't, but whenever we can, we're not giving ourselves that cushion to be able to allow our nervous system to regulate a bit more. So it's just compounding on itself over and over again. And, the more that we are, out of our window of tolerance, the more sensitive we're going to be, to your point. So,
Hmm.
I mean, I'm sure you've had a day, Dean, I know I have, where you come home and maybe it's just been, death by 1,000 cuts. Maybe it wasn't one big thing, but it was just like little things, all adding up and the perfect storm. And you get home and it's like the smallest little thing. And you feel like, oh my gosh, I might just go crazy right now. Or it's just a straw that breaks the camel's back, so to speak. And so that is a
Hmm.
very big sign that your nervous system is completely fried, and that it wasn't that one thing that really was that big of a deal. It's just what threw you over.
You mentioned self-awareness. I had a guy in the podcast. It's not gone live yet, but a scientist and a researcher who has developed an app to be able to essentially measure your heart rate. And his assessment is that your average heart rate, if you can reduce it by 5 points a minute, 5 beats a minute over an extended period of time, you actually add an extra year of your life. And so now I've been becoming more aware of, like, I got a Garmin and my watch tells me like my heart rate is okay. Right now it's 72, but if emotionally I start getting ramped up, I might go up to 80 or even 90. And so I love the idea of creating more awareness around this because it
Mm.
has everything to do with, emotional intelligence. And of course, the catch 22 is that part of the addiction that we have towards these external stimuli is also keeping us from being self aware. So we have to really become
Mm.
very intentional about being self aware around our own emotional state.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. I was just writing about this the other day as I'm in the process of writing my book. And I was writing about how a few years ago I got really addicted to like one of these like crime government dramas on Netflix, and I was just
Mm.
binging it. But what I realized is, probably about 2 or 3 days in, I was starting to not sleep. I found myself waking up in the middle of the night trying to solve the plot. I was like a crazy person. I was like, okay, I don't even know these people. They're not even real people, by the way. And I'm like waking up in the middle of the night, like trying to solve this puzzle. And what I realized is that it just completely, probably from some of my background and whatnot, which I won't get into right now, but it triggered something inside of me that put me on basically a hypervigilant rant.
Mm.
And I ended up
Mm.
just, getting this insomnia. And so I had to stop watching the show, unfortunately. But what I found through that process, Dean, is I just think that it's really important that we pay attention to like the self-awareness of like listening to that and then being able to figure out what you need to do for yourself. And I think so many of us are not doing that right now. And it's all over the place. I mean, it could be scrolling on Instagram. It could be, who you're having lunch with. We just have to be really thoughtful about the content that we're consuming and who we're spending time with right now.
It seems that one of the common denominators about what you're saying is immediate gratification is
Mm.
part of the addictive pattern that you
Mhm.
take a look at our phones, TikTok, Instagram, all those types of platforms. What we get is immediate gratification. Another friend request. Hey, I'm loved in the world. And that starts to create that addiction where we want more and more and more of that.
Mhm.
And I think that's part of the problem is that we're not thinking long term. And so when we think about trying to create some intentionality about this emotional intelligence, that's an activity that won't necessarily bear fruit for a while.
True. True. And that was my experience. When I went through it, I didn't really stop to ask why. Like, why am I like watching the show? And then only years later did it come out that I was escaping, that it was a
Mm,
coping strategy for me to dissociate and escape from the job I didn't like at the time or the argument I had or whatever. Right. And so then I realized that this was a long-standing pattern for me. And
mm.
so I think it's really important when, we do get caught up in those addictions that we stop and ask ourselves, why? Is it because I'm just wanting to see what's going on and it's genuine? Like I just want to scroll the news and see what's going on? Or is it because I am addicted to the serotonin and dopamine rush? Or it's a matter of comparison? Or am I just trying to escape the reality of what's going on in life right now? And it's the 10 minutes a day I can just completely submerge in a fake world where everything's perfect.
At least we think so.
Yeah,
So
right. Right.
you got this external world that we sort of explored a little bit. We got the
Yeah.
TikToks and we got geopolitical things and we got things going through media that telling us about how we should probably be afraid of everything.
Mhm.
And then we've got our own internal world of our history, our childhood. Could you speak to that a little bit in how that affects leaders, not the day to day what's happening, but the triggers that they re reintroduce to us, like the childhood
Mhm.
stuff, the stuff that took place
Mhm.
years ago that all of a sudden we don't know why we're reacting, we're just reacting.
Yeah. Well, I'll start a little bit with a methodology. So the theory and that's been studied is that you know our family is one of the first groups or teams we'll call it we're a part of. And so whatever exists within that family and whatever belief systems were created within that family about ourself and or people, families, relationships, everything, we carry with us for the rest of our life. And
Mm,
so we may adjust those beliefs as we grow up and we create our own relationships or in our own families. However, there will be some deep seated beliefs about ourselves and identities that we still carry with us well after we think we've done the work to resolve those. And so an example of that will be, what I'll give is, there's an executive or C-suite person who is always on, always working really, really hard. That's how they've gotten to where they are. They're a very high performer, very high functioning executive. They probably work on average, 50, 60 hours a week, sometimes more, rarely less. And they are, good person, kind person. Like we're not getting into any of that, but just in terms of what is driving their performance. And so, like many of us coaches, as you work with them, you'll realize that what's driving their performance, is either going to be fulfillment or it's going to be fear. And so
mm,
what you can uncover is many of the high performers, and that's why I typically work with high performers, tend to come from what we would call a dysfunctional family. And that's a very broad term, but there could be any kind of form of drug use, alcoholism, abuse,
mm.
neglect, divorce. I mean, anything that could be considered a traumatic event for a child. It could be witnessing someone in a car accident. It doesn't have to necessarily be, you know, um, sexual assaults or abuse or anything like that, but it can be. And so what we find is many of these high performers, they either go one path or the other. They either go to, I'm going to persevere, I'm going to achieve and succeed and do whatever I can to make things work and I will always be successful and I won't give up until I am. Or unfortunately, they succumb to the shame and guilt and grief, and they end up becoming drug and alcohol addicts and sometimes homeless. So it's kind of like we find in studies that they either thrive and survive, or they unfortunately just become the essence of what they're afraid that they were, like what they were told and what they believed about themselves. They succumb to their beliefs. Let's call it that. And so how this usually manifests is usually no one really is willing to open that up to you right away when you first meet with them. However, when you can start to see some of these patterns in terms of people pleasing, overfunctioning, workaholism show up, you can get underneath this idea that what is driving it. And if it comes to a fear of not knowing anything different because I had to survive, it's coming from a survival place. It's coming from hypervigilance. It's coming from needing to please my father or my mother or whoever. Then you can really unlock some of these core coping strategies, because then they can start to actually experience life in a way where they can still choose to succeed and do tasks that they're given, but it comes from a place of just choosing to do it for fulfillment and because they want to, versus trying to reconcile what that inner child is looking to get closure on, if that makes sense. And so it's a very complex and layered process, Dean.
Yeah. So I've got some people that I'm thinking about right now, executives who I would consider, based on our terminology, a workaholic. And if you ask them, they might go, "No, I love the work. I mean, I am jazzed about what I do, and I work as many hours as I do because it fulfills me." How do you kind of identify in yourself whether your workaholism is for good and it's part of your highest and best? And when is it a unresolved issue that is actually holding you back from your highest and best?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's all relative. And so that's why I think it's really important to guide them from an emotional intelligence perspective to self-awareness and ask them, there's always going to be a cost and a benefit to everything we do. So what's the intrinsic benefit for them to be working as hard as they are, and what are they getting out of it? And then helping to guide them to be really honest and truthful about what are the costs. Is it relationship costs? Is it energy costs? Is it health costs? What are the costs? And then once you have those costs, you can dig into those a little bit more to determine, are they just selling themselves a story that everything's fine? Or are they avoiding something by diving into work? Let's say maybe there's a failed relationship with a parent, or a sister or brother or child that they're not wanting to dive into because it's too painful, so they just stay busy. Or is it something else, and only they will know that answer, right? Or it could just be that they have a lot to do and maybe they need to get okay with asking for help and hiring someone to help them, so it really could be anything. And that's our job as leadership advisors and coaches to guide them through.
So if our emotional intelligence has been, say, depleted because of all the external things that you just described, which then has as a unfortunate outcome is less self-awareness to our situation, then the question that I have is that our capability for self-awareness may be down. How can we build a case for a leader to become more self-aware, to really even go deeper into some of their choices now that might be reenactments of prior choices? I mean, how do we create the ROI for this? Because you could say that we have a society that says this is weak, we shouldn't be focused on this. The strong inherits the prize. We reward you. We're going to give you more work, better pay, because you are a doer of getting stuff done. Whether or not you're a workaholic is not my concern. I just want to see the bottom line. How do we build that ROI argument that says, hey, leader, maybe it would be a good thing to get out of your own way, and here's some benefits to doing that. I mean, what's your approach to getting people to follow you in this process
Sure, yeah,
when they might be
absolutely.
resistant?
Yeah. Well, I lead with the fact that errors are expensive. And
Mm,
the higher you are up in the hierarchy, the more expensive an error will be. And so it all comes down to how you execute under pressure. And so we have to think of the more, let's say, out of the window of tolerance that you are,
hmm
the more you're going to make errors. And we can get better at hiding it the older we get and the more seasoned we become within corporations, but it doesn't mean that we're never going to make errors, and it doesn't mean we're not feeling it internally. And so what that does is that affects your decision quality, and it also impacts your inner authority. Are
mm,
you really feeling confident in the decision you're making and how you're leading the team and how that's being communicated? And can, whether it's the New York Stock Exchange or whether it's shareholders or whether it's your employees, can they sense that? And so all of this work that I'm talking about that stems from old coping strategies that are rooted in fear and blame and shame, whether we know it or not, we all have them. And until we deal with them, it will always impact inner authority, decision quality, and how you execute under pressure. And it makes
yeah,
it hard. Think of it in terms of like you're in a car, Dean, and the window's getting foggy, and no matter how much you run the windshield wipers and turn the defogger on, the window's not clearing.
yeah,
And then when it finally clears, that's because you have self-regulation and you can actually
yeah.
see.
This is probably out of the scope of this conversation, but
Sure.
at what point does a leader in an organization who sees in one of their teammates some real barriers to their performance, which very well might be unresolved childhood crap,
Mhm. Mhm.
do they continue to work with them to provide support, or do they say your performance isn't there and it's time to move you out? I mean, I
Mhm.
see this struggle a lot. I see
Mhm.
leaders trying to be therapists to their employees, and then later, a year or 2 years later, they're right back where they started
I see it too.
and realize that they probably should have moved them to another role or maybe out because they weren't being successful. So, do we have an enormous amount of pressure for our leaders to almost be therapists when in fact, maybe we need to be a little bit more cut and dry on some of this?
I think so, and I think post-pandemic, we've just seen a huge influx in this. Also, as we're seeing mental health, increase, challenges increase globally. So I see this a lot as well, and I think my thoughts there would be two things. First is I believe a leader or manager's job isn't to be the therapist, but is to be able to identify when something is out of scope for them and to bring in
Mm,
someone like you or me or experts in the field. It could be a therapist or whatnot to assess the situation. Because oftentimes, it's for me, I know about a year or two ago, it took me less than 3 sessions to be able to determine that a new hire that was brought in that was not gelling with the company, she'd been there about 6 months, get her, I could see it in the first session, but I needed to, obviously validate what I was seeing and have her come to terms on her own. But within the third session, she said, you know what? I don't think this job's a good fit for me. I don't think
mm,
I want to be here. And so oftentimes it's helping them help themselves by being able to get a leader to determine here's what is not working for me in this role. Here's why there's this constant tension. Maybe I either need to move to a new role within this company, or maybe it's just time for me to move to a new company. And, that it sounds interesting because I know as executive advisors and coaches, people don't hire you to have you work with executives so they leave the company. But at the end of the day, if that's what's best for the team, and that's the best ROI for the company, and it's going to make everyone happy,
hmm
then that is what I believe is the best result.
So, trying to help the employee who might be struggling, moving away from task focused to more purpose focused is what I'm sort of hearing you say.
Yeah,
Like if
and
I'm
and
really
and
focused on my go ahead. No.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Yes, and
No.
like values. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of people I think don't give enough credit to values, but it's been proven time and time again that when we each have our core values, and when our values are feeling threatened, that's when we tend to act out, or we tend to not find fulfillment in the work we're doing. So if something changes culturally, organizationally, leadership wise, or mission wise, it can all of a sudden create a values conflict for a leader. And then suddenly they just aren't producing the way they used to, and they don't know why, and they're frustrated and they're trying to force fit it. But when they realize that, oh gosh, I valued autonomy and altruism, and suddenly now the new org structure is not about autonomy or altruism, you're going to have a really hard time thriving there.
All right, let's play with this a bit. Let's assume that I'm your client. I'm a leader in an organization. I'm a high producer, gregarious, outgoing, and I have tendencies for micromanagement a little bit. I have a tendency to be hypervigilant. And in those states of hypervigilant, I might be reactive to things without thinking through what am I really saying. So an email may go out before I really think about it, for example. Say that's the MO of your client. How would you start? What kind of questions would you ask me to help unpack some of this and maybe even tie in some older patterns in my life?
Well, I think first I always like to start when I'm first getting to know someone, asking them what do they love about their job and what do they hate about their job. And I use the word hate intentionally. And then I dig into, what do you think you're really good at? And what do you think you're not so good at?
Could you go back to why did you use what you love about your job feels obvious.
Yeah.
But it is a little bit different to ask, what do you hate about it? Where are you going with that line of questioning when you ask, what do you hate about your job?
Well, so where I'm going is that it helps us indicate burden. And whenever we feel burdened or obligation, those are very heavy feelings and emotions. And they're likely things that we don't want to do, but we feel we have to do. And then we can unpack, do you have guilt and shame about that? Like, because maybe you don't know how to do it that well, or you think you should do it better. Okay. Does that make sense? So I can give you an example if it's helpful.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, let's play this out.
Okay. So let's say, there's I've often worked with executives on keynote delivery and exec presence and being on stage. And there's many, many, many executives who believe that just because they can talk in front of a employee all hands, or in a boardroom, or with customers in an executive briefing center, that skill will translate to talking on stage to 10,000 people. And it doesn't. It's like going from a bike to a unicycle. It's similar, but different balance, different techniques. And they often harbor deep down, they admit it to me, some guilt, shame, or embarrassment around that, because they feel that I'm a CXO or I'm a VP and I work at this big Fortune 50 company and I should be able to do this. And they're holding themselves to a very high bar. So, and they're usually humble enough to know to ask for help, but their ego gets in the way, in that it doesn't want to necessarily allow them to say, wow, like, I'm kind of embarrassed about the fact that I don't know how to do this better. I want to spend some more time on this. And so often at times it's the burden of the job. Like, a lot of leaders do not want to be talking to the media, do not want to be talking to the press, or delivering keynotes. But once you get up to a certain level, it's an expectation. And so they look at it as a burden of the job. And as long as it's a burden of the job, they're never going to have joy. They're never going to enjoy it. And so my job is to get them to admit that it's a burden, and figure out how we can help lessen that burden or unburden them and make it more fun.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that the hate that I have for a particular part of my job leads me to some sort of childhood trauma, for example. It just might be that my style is this, right?
Not at all.
We're not making that. No. It could, you're saying, but it may not.
It's sort of like that's later on. I mean, in using the same example, it could lead that, oh my gosh, the reason I hate to stand up and talk in front of people is because when I was in 5th grade, I stood up and gave a speech and everyone laughed at me. And even though I've delivered several successful speeches since then, sometimes that memory still comes back. And I feel like it's embarrassing. And and it really, really traumatized me. It may not
Understood.
be that, but it
Right.
could be that.
Well,
Yeah.
like, so this person that I'm playing out for you in this kind of quasi coaching session, let's say that they hate it when, I don't know, let's just say that when people say they're going to do something, they don't follow through, or they don't respond to emails, or they
Mhm,
can't get other people to do the work that they are supposed to
mhm.
do. And it holds up a lot of other work because of that, right? This lack of communication, transparency, and accountability. Oh, I hate that, right? I'm sure a few people, myself included, have a little bit of problem with that. So, um, is there, what would you do with that particular scenario? How would you coach a person around that?
Well, the first thing I'd ask them is, what do you think it means about you?
Hmm. All right.
If somebody's
So
not if
let's,
somebody's not writing you back or being accountable or
that's a
responsible,
good question.
what do you think it means about you?
Well, we could play that out. Let's say that I might, my deepest fear might be that I'm not being valued enough to have somebody respond. Or
Right?
if they valued me enough, I would get a response, or they would do the work or whatever. Whether that's true or not, that might be my
That's your
interpretation on that.
perception.
That's my
That's right.
perception. Yeah.
Right.
Which
And
then which
so
then fuels my issue around it, right?
right. So then I'd say,
Yeah.
well, when's the first time you remember feeling that way?
Oh man. I'd have to think about that. I know. So what goes to my mind, this is just me personally. If I were playing this out to a real situation, I probably felt out of control when I was a little kid, knowing
Mhm,
that my parents were going through marital issues and I wanted
mhm,
to have them stop, and I couldn't
mhm.
get them to stop because, they were the god and goddesses of my life at that time. I was just a little kid, but I probably felt out of control then and wanted to, so it brings it back to that memory in my mind,
Right.
personally.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I mean, and again, and so then I would bring up the accountability piece. I say, well, accountability was mentioned a few times. What would your parents have said to you if they were accountable?
If they were accountable, this has nothing to do with you. And we will take this argument elsewhere and we'll tell you what's really going on versus pretending that nothing is happening. Because that used to be what happened
Right.
is you'd wake up in the morning, I would wake up in the morning and everything seemed fine. But at night,
Swept
all
under the
hell
rug.
broke loose. And so you realize, wait a minute, the world is not what it seems to be.
Which is
Yeah,
not, there's a whole psychological theory on that, but that's very destabilizing for a child, right? Because
totally. Yeah.
they need to feel safe and secure.
Yeah.
If we look at Maslow's hierarchy, and so, again, we're just playing with this here, but the hypothesis there that we would explore is this idea that you're triggered when people don't aren't accountable and responsive because you didn't get that as a child. Hypothetically, is our hypothesis. Therefore, you created this belief um, system about you that you probably worked really hard to overcome, but it's still that doesn't mean it still doesn't trigger you when people are not
True.
accountable.
I overcompensate. I'm a planner of planning. I mean, I plan all the
Right.
time. I
Right.
I am hyper vigilant at times, less
Yeah.
so, but I am. That's part of
Yeah.
my past, and so I think it's based on that background that we just described.
And we
Yeah,
all have this. I mean, I just want to be
yeah,
so super clear. Like even like the most successful people in the planet, who we don't think they just don't want to share it with everybody. That's why you have to become that's why I call myself a confidential trusted advisor or executive
yeah,
advisor, because not everyone in the world wants to know about this. And we all have this, but the freedom that's available to you once you even acknowledge it, and you like the conversation we even had today, like once you acknowledge it, you're like, oh yeah, you will
yeah.
notice you start to get less triggered by it now, just
Truly,
because of that awareness.
I think it's important that you bring that up, that you begin to start seeing freedom, because I've heard some people say, like, yeah, I know that I'm triggered, but those triggers are my engine, my energy to get this stuff done. And I'm so well compensated, rewarded, and thought of in such a high esteem that I don't want to lose that. So if I don't work as hard as I do, what's at stake is all of the security and all of the income and everything else that might be put into
Mm,
that category. So I need to be slightly neurotic in order to be successful.
yeah. Well, and it works for a lot of people. personally, for me, it makes my heart sad to hear that because, for instance, I was having a call with an executive a few weeks ago and something similar to that came up. And I said, what would happen if you had to stop proving yourself?
Yeah.
And what came about it was that it wasn't just about proving to others, it was about proving to self. And I said, well, that's where you're lying to yourself. What if you didn't even have to prove to yourself? And the reaction from him was almost like he didn't know what that meant, or he's like, what do you mean? And I said, what if just being you, living and breathing on this planet Earth was enough? And that kind of just blew his mind. And
Right.
The reality is that the person you're talking about, hypothetically or real, is going to always be accountable for doing things and achieving things. That's just who they are. So having this added motivator of a negative driver is actually using way more energy than is required for them to be successful. And so what usually ends up happening is they'll probably be fine for a while, but they probably have quiet moments at night by themselves where they are broken down because they're exhausted, because it's a very exhausting way to live life.
Yeah.
It's unnecessary.
Yep.
But you don't, but when it's all you know, it's your comfort and security, and we're so afraid to let that go. And so that's why I really enjoy working with executives in that space, because my life experience has just put me through it myself. And I feel like I'm a good guide in that space. But at the same time, I know that everyone needs it. It's just not everyone's willing to take the plunge, Gene.
I think it's also, Kendra, really attractive to see a leader or anybody who is really coherent in themselves. So they're really whole. They're really in their skin. I'm trying to find other ways of describing this. So they're
Totally.
not living their life with constantly being, re-stimulated by old childhood issues, that they are just confident, clean, purpose-centered. The chord on the piano is a major chord, not a minor chord. It just hums. To be
Yeah.
around that is
It's
sort of
rare.
analogous to being, I know, and it's so attractive. You've seen it. You see a public speaker who goes up, who doesn't own the space in that same way that we would say, but is comfortable with themselves. You could just listen to them all day, even though you have
Right.
the tendency to want to look at your phone, because truth is sexy. Truth is attractive. Presence is attractive. Presence is a magnet. And when you have that yourself, everybody else wants to know, how do I get it? But they get a little piece of it by being in your presence.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm a big believer that the only way to truly get that inner authority with that has that presence and become that magnet is to, clean what's off your driver's your windshield, right? What's off the
Yeah.
window.
Yeah.
And the only way to do that is to become self-aware, self-regulate. And then a lot of times that leads to, okay, what are my holdups? Like it could be from when I was 20, it could be from when I was 30, it could be from when I was 10, or it could be from when I was 4. But what are my holdups? Because whether I know it or not, it's leaking my authority, it's leaking my
Yeah.
energy,
Yeah.
it's impacting my presence, it's undermining my competence and confidence. And I can pretend all day long, but I know when I go to bed at night that it's still there. And I want to give
Yeah.
people freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, going back to the beginning of this conversation, I think that we are a bit less emotionally intelligent, and we're a bit more trigger happy. Um, Certainly before and after COVID, I think we can see differences in people's ability for transparency, for dealing with conflict, for being introspective. I've actually, in some companies where there's enough trust, because I think you have to create opportunities for growth, but not so much that it overwhelms them and they shut down. And so I had this question where I've asked some executives, I said, tell me, so identify how was conflict managed when you were a child? What was the process like? So they talk about that. Okay, how is that method of dealing with conflict present in your life now as a leader? And all of a sudden,
Yep.
they see the relationship between how they deal with it and how they were taught to deal with it as kids. Then how does that then influence the way you manage conflict with the teams that you lead? And then how does that also manage conflict with your clients that you are trying to serve? And all of a sudden they start to see these dots connect. And
That's
then, of
right.
course, the last question is then, how do you unpack some of that? How do you let that one go? But it tees somebody up really well for some self-awareness.
Yeah. So you're doing the work too. So yeah,
Oh, yeah.
absolutely. And I see that all the time in terms of, um, what are the ways in which we created belief systems, but how is it creating an identity for us and how we behave according to that identity that we're shaped by being a child? Like, for instance, yelling in the home is bad, is a bad thing. We don't yell. So you're in a workplace and you have an over gregarious, aggressive, assertive personality, and they get a little excited or, heated in meetings, but it blows over quickly. You're probably triggered by that because it doesn't make you feel safe, but it's also because you were told it was a bad thing and you never learned how to actually be around it. So there's a lot of things that we're taught when we're younger that create our belief systems.
Well, I'll finish with this thought, and I want to hear again how people can connect with you so they can follow your work or even work with you. But I was thinking about, as you were just talking, Kendra, that, as children, we follow our parents. They set the tone when we're little. They're sponges. But that same emulation takes place when we are adults. Employees follow their bosses. We're looking to those leaders for how should we all behave. And I think that my general unscientific sense is that we're probably only aware of about 30% of the influence that we have on other people. The other is a blind spot. We just don't know. And if leaders were more cognizant of just the kind of influence they have on other people, they would probably start to become more intentional about their energy, their attitude, their dress, their presentation, their emotional intelligence, their own triggers, because not only is it affecting them, it's affecting the entire team or the entire company.
Amen to
Yeah.
that. I mean, it's 100% true. I think that, I think sometimes for leaders in particular, it's less about what you actually are saying and doing and more about what you're not saying and not
Yeah.
doing that is leaving the impression that could be hurtful.
Yeah. So you got a podcast, right?
I do. Yes. It's
So
called the
talk
High
about the
Achieving Leader.
podcast. How often does it come out? How can we find it?
Yeah,
Talk about
so
your
it's
book.
monthly and it's called the High Achieving Leader Podcast. We were called the Unworthy Leader Podcast, but we rebranded to just cast a wider net to really serve the high achieving leader population, which is a subset of those who deal with imposter phenomenon and whatnot. However, we wanted to really speak to the larger audience. It's monthly. It's on Spotify. It's on YouTube. We have 44,000 followers. And then I also post on LinkedIn.
And you've got a book coming up.
I do. I have a book that I'm in the process of writing. It's called 52 Weeks to Freedom. And it's sort of a week by week lesson, story, some spirituality, and some thought-provoking questions to ponder and answer. So I'm coming out with that hopefully the end of 2026.
Good. Excellent. And then how can people follow you on LinkedIn or your company name and address?
Sure. So you can find me at KendraDahlstrom.com or on LinkedIn, just /Kendra Dahlstrom, DAHLSTROM.
Good Swedish name.
Yes, Newlund.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you for this. This has been great. Really wonderful conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me, Dean. Have a great day.
Me too. If you found value in today's conversation, please take a moment to rate and review our show on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. It helps more people discover Leadervation and this kind of conversation. And if you're looking to strengthen leadership, culture, or team performance in your organization, you can learn more about working with me and Mission Facilitators International at mfileadership.com.